Fescar ma a Huladinja, Tang for Ross agus Dúich Chalasrach. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Ross and Callander's Landscape, for inviting me along to the virtual world to talk about Gaelic in historic Perthshire. Thank you also to Ross for some of the images that I am going to illustrate tonight's talk with. I'm going to start so much to talk about when it comes to Gaelic in historic Perthshire. I've picked out some key facts and stories from across Perthshire to share with you and give you a taster of the area's rich Gaelic culture. We're going to make our way through the Shirach, or the Shire, exploring its history, place names, songs, poetry, stories, and its people. Each and every one of these points deserves its own talk, so I'll leave you with some other sources to follow up if you'd like to find out more. Call it a wee homework task. So most of my knowledge of Gaelic in Perthshire is of the area that lies within the Perth and Kinross Council boundary, but Perthshire extends much further than that boundary, and I'll try my best to cover as much of it geographically as I can tonight. Perthshire is right in the heart of Scotland geographically, but also at the heart of Scotland's story. It holds a culture and heritage born of the many different communities who have lived here since prehistoric times and the extraordinary events they have witnessed. Gaelic is very much an integral part of that story, and the history and continuing traditions of Gaelic in Perthshire are fundamental to Scottish Gaelic, past, present, and future. Although we may not have huge numbers of Gaelic speakers today, at one time in the not so distant past, we had a large population of Gaelic speakers, and Gaelic was the language of our communities right across the area. In 1881, the census began to record Gaelic speakers, and at this time found 60% of the people living in Perthshire spoke Gaelic. This extended right across the area from Nagarav Criachan Fiarsht, Highland Perthshire, or the rough bounds of Perthshire, Shirach Fiarsht West Perthshire, Shirach Fiarsht Eastern Perthshire, and Perth itself. In some places, up to 80% of the population spoke Gaelic at this time. Just get my PowerPoint in order there. So now we only have to take a very quick glance at any OS map of Perthshire to see Gaelic is all around us. In fact, the majority of our place names right across the area are Gaelic or of Gaelic origin. These names tell us about the people who lived in the area, the language they spoke, how the land was used, and some of the things they experienced. Now, I'm not going to give you a full rundown of all the place names we have in Perthshire because we could be here all year, if not longer. But the archaeology of words can tell us a lot about what happened in this area. And if you want to find out a wee bit more about the area on this map in particularly, we have just released a video called Our Gaelic Landscape that features by Mccool. Place names can help us identify places where key events took place, describe terrain, and give us an idea of who or what lived here. Until relatively recently in its history, Gaelic was the native language of most people in Callander, or Callasrach as it's known in Gaelic, meaning Harbour Street. Last year, Dr. Peter McNiven carried out a study of the place names in and around Callander, which is available on Callander's Landscape website. This is a snapshot of the map where, and it tells us about the rocky hill of the goats, Cregan and Gore, a rough rounded hill, Mial Garav. There are many Mial Garavs in Perthshire, and I'm sure some of you have climbed them and discovered that they are quite rough. The rounded hill of the soldier, Mial Ninsaidir, and the field of the bishop, Achig and Esbig. Gaelic had been the predominant community language in most of Perthshire for many centuries. Gaelic isn't just in the names of our towns, villages and hills. It's in our waterways, our lochs, our rivers, our streams. Callum McLean's video exploring the wild waters of Callander gives us more examples of these, so make sure that you check that out too. Here is Loch Ranyach, or Loch Rannoch. Rannach is the Gaelic word for bracken, and the land all around this area is covered in bracken. Whether you're out hiking in the hills, bagging one of our many Munros, or taking a walk around your local area, Gaelic can be found in the place names all over Perthshire. This is the sign for Rannoch Road in the Letham area of Perth. The areas of Perth include Tulloch, Letham, Craigie, Canoe and Moncrief, all names of Gaelic origin. The street names of the places right across the area are full of Gaelic, and the Glens area of Perth in particular has street names named after all the glens in Perthshire. So if you want a snapshot of the Gaelic place names, it's a great place to visit, especially during lockdown when we can't get out to the rest of our glens. On the theme of glens, this is one of my favourite places in the area. Over the past few years, we've been doing a lot of work on walking our Gaelic landscape with author John Murray, who wrote Reading the Gaelic Landscape, which features a lot of Perthshire's landscape because there's just so much in there. And on one of our walks, we visited Untitled Chapter, the Pleasant Glen, and it soon became one of my favourite places to go. Galactic is located around the Glen Shee area in the eastern part of Perthshire, which takes its name from the Shee water. The word Shee is something we find a lot of in place names across the area. Glen Shee is the Glen of the Fairies. Over in Highland Perthshire, we also have Shee Chalian or Schehallien, the fairy hill of the Caledonians. I'm going to return to talk about Schehallien later on though. With place names come stories, and there are many stories connected to the supernatural and many about fairies. We even have stories over in the west part of Perthshire about the fairy minister of Aberfoyle. Reverend Robert Kirk, born in 1644. He was a Church of Scotland minister to the village largely Gaelic-speaking population until he died in 1692, aged 47, under suspicious circumstances. He provided the first translation to Gaelic of the Book of Psalms. However, he is best remembered more for his book, The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns and Fairies. The stories of the supernatural in Perthshire don't just stop at fairies though. They include Iach Uisce, or Kelpies, Tarav Uisce, water bulls, giants, and Urisks, or water sprites. Aberfeldy, or Oberfiali, is a key feature in the story of Gaelic in Perthshire for many reasons, one of those being that it is home to the Perthshire and Angus Provincial Mod, which began in 1923. Aberfeldy takes its name from the Urisk, or water sprite, Piali and Spout, Piali of the Spout. The Urisks are said to be beings that haunt lonely and sequestered places, and they were strong in Perthshire. We can see this from this rhyme, naming those that lived around the area. Piali lived in the Falls of Mowness, and if you've ever been up there, you don't tend to see Piali, you see a lot of Robert Burns, but that is where Piali lived. Continuing on the theme of water and the supernatural, we all have place names in the area connected to the Cailleach. The Cailleach is a divine hag and a magnificent female force of nature. She's said to control the weather, protect all wild creatures, stride over mountains, wade thigh deep across lochs, and on occasion shapeshift into a deer and other creatures. Around Callander, we have na Cailleach, as you can see in this picture, the waterfall of the Cailleach. Loch na Cailleach is up around Kinloch Rannoch, on the way up Bain Achualich, the mountain of herding or mountain of the boar. Sometimes place names in Gaelic have two different meanings depending on the local interpretation and the stories that go with it, and some have been lost in translation. Now, when I was back up here in September, as soon as we reached this point at Loch Callander, there was an extremely icy, powerful wind, and we saw a deer making her way across the landscape. After this experience, I can see how the loch may have gotten its name locally, if anyone else experienced the same thing I did. There's also a Glen Callander, where you will find a tiny house with a family of water-worn stones, known as Tai na Callander or Tai na Botach. Sadly, I don't have any photos of this because I've never yet been to visit it, but there's a wee water-worn stone that I found on the shores of Loch Ness in the picture there, just to give you an idea of what they look like. So Tai na Callander or Tai na Botach is connected to a pagan ritual where the stones are taken out to face down the glen at Bealtaine and moved inside the house at Samhain. Now, whether or not this has existed since pagan times or is a much more recent monument, it doesn't matter. This ritual goes on and is part of the unique culture we have in Perthshire. We also have lots of stones in the area with stories. You'll also find lots of stories about the Stone of Destiny in the Gaelic landscape in Perthshire, but I'm not going to go into that tonight. The Callander features in Fenian legends which can be found in Perthshire, from giants sleeping in the hillsides along the shores of Loch Rannoch, to giant stones in glens such as Clach Ossian in the small glen near Amalree, and the many tales of Mccool. So this is Clach Ossian here. And they actually moved the stone when they were building the road and did find some bones underneath, but they didn't belong to Ossian. There was a ceremony for whoever it was that was buried underneath, and the local people buried them elsewhere. In the area around Callander, traces of Fenian tradition or stories of the Fiona can be detected at Alt Nansleishach and Ben Gulipin, both place names which feature in the tales of the death of the famous hero Dermot. There are many variations of this tale I'm about to tell. I first heard it about 5 years ago from Ruairi Magdalene, Roddy McLean, who I know has been down doing some work with Callander's landscape on place names and stories. The version of this tale I'm going to tell you is the one featured in the fantastic comic Callander, Atche na Scéalachan, Callander, Place of the Stories, which was part of a project involving local primary schools. I need to take a swig of water before this story. So this is a tragic love story. Grania and Fiona Mccool were to be married. The only thing was, Grania didn't love Fiona, she loved his nephew Dermot. No one is quite sure why, but it's probably something to do with the magical love spot beneath his eye that made people instantly fall in love with him. And so, Grania and Dermot ran off together. All across Ireland and Scotland, they ran and hid for many years. Angry and broken-hearted, Fiona never stopped looking for them. And then one day, while passing Alt Nansleishach, near to the falls of Lenny, he saw wood shavings floating in the water. Fiona followed the shavings up into the hills, and there he found Dermot, sharpening his spear. As if there was no trouble between them, Fiona asked Dermot why he was sharpening his spear. "Are you going to kill the wild boar?" he asked. What boar? A boar had been terrifying the area in recent weeks. So, Dermot, being brave, hunted the boar. Fiona had hoped the boar would kill Dermot, but Dermot killed the boar. He now needed another way to get rid of his enemy, so Fiona convinced Dermot to measure the beast in paces. So he walked it from snout to tail. He then asked Dermot to check it again, walking back the other way against the bristles. A poisonous bristle stuck in his foot, and venom flooded his veins, and he fell into a swoon. Nearby, there was a healing stream. Grania knew the water could heal Dermot, and regretting his actions, Fiona ran to the stream, gathered up the water in his hands, and ran back. But when he saw Dermot again, he changed his mind after all the hurt that they'd put him through, and he dropped the water. And so, Dermot died there on the slope of Ben Gulipin. Ben Gulipin is the snouty mountain. But did he? Or is the story set in another location in Perthshire? Was it at the foot of Ben Gulipin in Glen Shee, a site also associated with this story and a snouty mountain? And we have more place names in this site connected to the story, which includes Lepi and Turk, which is the boar's bed, and Tulich Germich, Dermot's hillock. It is said that Dermot was buried at Tulich Germich, Dermot's hillock, along with Grania white hounds. I think there were 7 of them. There may not be 7 in every story, but I heard there were 7. There's also a poem written by Aileen Ogilvie in the early 16th century that places this legend in Glen Shee. But what do you think? The tale also features in other parts of Scotland and Ireland. Whatever the truth may be, we have 2 very strong cases for it being in Perthshire. Can archaeology help us discover the truth? I don't know if any work has ever been done to see if Dermot, Grania and the hounds are there, but that might be able to help us find out where it actually happened. Now I'm going to move away from the supernatural world for a while and talk about people we definitely know existed. We're staying in Glen Shee though, where Hamish Henderson spent his childhood, in this cottage at the Spittal of Glen Shee, right at the foot of Mount Gulipin and next to the Gulipin Lodge, if anyone is ever up that way. That's where he was, right next to the churchyard. Hamish Henderson was a Scottish poet, songwriter, soldier and intellectual who was born in Blairgowrie. Through his work in the field of folk song and poetry, he has been referred to as the founding father of Scotland's 20th century folk renaissance and was involved in the setting up of the School of Scottish Studies. During his childhood, Hamish would have heard Gaelic spoken in the community, and his own mother was a native Gaelic speaker. Hamish collected many field recordings of songs, stories and traditions across Scotland, including many connected to Gaelic. And you can take a listen to some of these on Tober and Dulch's website, also known as the Kist of Riches. Now, one of the many songs Hamish's mother sang to him when he was a child is a song set in another Perthshire glen. Gaelic Crea, also known as Glenlyon Lament, was composed by the widow of Gregor Rui MacGregor around 1570 after he was executed by her brother and father, the Campbells of Glenlyon. In this song, she's telling her child of the awful situation, pouring out her grief, and also mentions the fact Gregor Rui had been beheaded. It's quite a graphic lyric later on in the song. This song is known throughout the world and is possibly one of the most famous Gaelic songs there is, and possibly one of the earliest recorded Gaelic songs with an author, and we can prove actually when it took place because there are records. There are many variations on the melody and words, but I'm actually going to sing a little bit for you just now, and if you wanted to join in the chorus, the words are there. And I hope this isn't too loud in your headphones. I'll move my mic a wee bit. Shimiga hi cheluchis hidden, she chanan shak she hen, Evergrika gonsa karigan, Rishan gawinjian, Ovan, ovan, ovan hiri, ovan hiri, ovan, ovan, ovan hiri. Small, more full, small. So there we have a little bit of the Glen Lyon Lament, and that's a picture of Glen Lyon I took last year in the mist, and I couldn't stop thinking about that song while I was there. Perthshire is absolutely full of songs. Some we don't know the melodies for, and some we know very well, some that are well known all across the world, not just in Scotland. And Hamish Henderson wasn't the only one in Perthshire who collected songs and stories. 241 Perthshire Gaelic folktales and songs were collected from people in and around the Blair Castle estate in 1891 by Lady Evelyn Stewart Murray, daughter of the 7th Duke of Atholl. These are now held in the School of Scottish Studies archives at the University of Edinburgh. Her collection of folktales was published with English translations in 2009. And there's a picture of the book there, and this is my favourite book at the moment. There's so much in there, the stories are amazing, and all the supernatural things I mentioned earlier are mentioned in this book as well as other stories. So I highly recommend getting this book and having a look for yourself. It's a valuable source of information, and it's all about the Gaelic and the dialect of the Gaelic spoken in the area. Lady Evelyn's story itself is absolutely fascinating, and at the moment we have a project called the Tays Gaelic Memoir in partnership with Fraser, Common and Parent o Perthshire and Pitlochry Festival Theatre, where we are exploring the stories she collected and recording some of them, so you can check those out on Pitlochry Festival Theatre's website. I'm going to send Ross through lots of links to pass out after this talk as well that you can discover for yourself. So as well as sharing the stories of Lady Evelyn and the other stories that we know of in the area, we're looking for people to send us their stories of Gaelic in and around the Tays Gaelic landscape. Now, one of the many pieces that Lady Evelyn collected was this version of Buin na Ranich, a song which I've heard is said to have been sung by a fairy. Whether or not the song that is true or the song originates in Perthshire is something I don't know for sure, but this is a version of it that was collected in Perthshire, and I'm going to sing a wee bit too. And again, if you know it or want to join in, please feel free. Hamiski balhiogski buin na ranich Hamiski balhiogski buin na ranich dunan cool and tohin Brian tohin cool and tohin voich cool and tohin Brian tohin hula la munner Hamiski balhiogski buin na ranich Hamiski balhiogski buin na ranich dunan. And Buin na Ranich is about cutting bracken, and I can imagine it could have been set around Kinloch Ranich, cutting all that bracken that we see around Bain Hualich and Loch and Callich. Still on the theme of song collecting, which is my favourite thing to talk about, we have the Cullen collection of 18th century songs and tunes from the local area, which was compiled by Charles Stewart of Tyne-Doon, Cullen. Charles was a prominent figure in Cullen and Perthshire and helped to preserve and promote local history, folklore and music. He was Chief of the Gaelic Society of Perth, Director of the Cullen Railway and Head of Cullen Gaelic Choir. And some of the songs from this collection were recorded in recent years by local singer Morven Mingus as part of Fashion and Gale's Furin project. We also have Marjorie Kennedy Fraser, a singer and song collector who was born in Perth, and there's actually a plaque It's actually next to the Job Centre on Perth High Street, that commemorates Marjorie Kennedy Fraser and where she lived. And she went over to the Hebrides and collected and transcribed songs from the Hebrides alongside Kenneth MacLeod. Both of these individuals have a connection with the Gaelic Society of Perth. So that's who we're going to talk about next. March 2020, which was a very eventful month in all of our lives, but March 2020 marks the 140th anniversary of the Gaelic Society of Perth. The Gaelic Society was formed in March 1880 when economic deprivation, the clearances, and famine in the Highlands earlier in the century had started a wave of emigration southwards. Industry had grown in the lowlands and many Highlanders were attracted to the cities and towns of the south. The Gaelic Society of Perth was formed as a meeting place for social activity and entertainment, as well as allowing Gaelic speakers to preserve their native language and culture. Meetings and lectures relating to Highland culture were held throughout the winter, and there was a yearly social meeting held in the City Hall in Perth. 141 years on, the Gaelic Society have continued to hold monthly social events celebrating Gaelic language and culture in the form of a ceilidh at St Matthew's Church Hall. Their 140th anniversary ceilidh took place on Friday the 13th of March 2020 and was one of the last events to take place in the area before we went into lockdown. And I know that some of you are listening tonight, so I'd just like to take the opportunity to say hello and thank you to the Gaelic Society of Perth for all the support they've given me in my role as Gaelic officer for the area, because their knowledge and advice, everything has been fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to the next ceilidh, whenever that may be. The Gaelic Society has a long association with the Royal National Mod, Scotland's premier Gaelic festival, which is due to take place in Perth again for the 10th time in October 2022, all being well. John Mackay's book, Highlanders Stand Shoulder to Shoulder, exploring the history of the Gaelic Society, is a fascinating read. The book is named after the motto of the society, Clown and Gael a Ghualav a Chéile, Highlanders Stand Shoulder to Shoulder, and is full of stories. The Gaelic Society also have a collection of Gaelic books and resources, and some very historic, that are available in the AK Bell Library in Perth. At the old Caledonian Road Primary School in Perth, you'll find a plaque celebrating the life of Roderick McKinnon. And Roderick McKinnon, you can see, is in the front of this picture. Roderick McKinnon was born in Skye. He was headmaster of Caledonian Road School, which I think was called Southern District School as well, in Perth, from 1950 to 1968. He was the chief of the Gaelic Society of Perth from 1950 to 1957, and national president of Uncommon Gaelach, who are responsible for the Royal National Mod, from 1971 to 1975. In 1971, while teaching an adult class at Perth Academy, Roderick wrote the well-regarded manual for Gaelic learners, Teach Yourself Gaelic. It was reprinted 7 times by 1977 and is still in use by some people today. I found a copy in my great auntie's house in Canada a few years ago, so it's made its way across the water. Although Gaelic was not taught at Caledonian Road Primary School, Gaelic medium education has been available in the Perth and Kinross area since 1993, and we now have 2 Gaelic medium units in the area. There's also schools right across the area where Gaelic is delivered as part of the 1+2 Languages Initiative, Gaelic playgroups and adult learning classes within our communities. If you've ever been to Cullen, you may recognise this statue or memorial. The Stewart Memorial at Killin is maintained by the Gaelic Society of Perth, who fundraised for it back in the late 1800s. This pays tribute to Reverend James Stewart, Minister of Killin from 1736 to 1789. He translated the New Testament scriptures into Scottish Gaelic for the first time, which appeared in 1767. This next picture is one of my favourite pictures I've seen. This shows the unveiling of this memorial. And look how many people were there. He was obviously very well respected, but what is more fascinating about this photo is there's a whole account of this event in John Mackay's book, Highlanders Stand Shoulder to Shoulder, talking about the day and how the train left Perth with a large number of people from the Gaelic Society all dressed in bunnets and Highland dress with pipers to attend this event, and everyone was excitedly waiting at Killin for them to arrive. So he was very, very important to the Gaelic Society and the people in the local area. He didn't do this alone though. 18th century Gaelic poet Dougal Buchanan, known as the Bard of Rannoch, assisted Reverend James Stewart in his translation of the New Testament. He also accompanied Stewart to Edinburgh to oversee the printing of the result. He was born in the parish of Balwhidder and became a schoolmaster at Kinloch Rannoch, where he lived for quite some time. He wrote in Gaelic on religious themes, but very little of his poetry survives. He's remembered by the Buchanan Monument erected in his memory in the centre of Strathire and an obelisk in the centre of Kinloch Rannoch. And you can't really miss either of these memorials when you visit these places. He's also featured in a book by Graham Cooper called Da Hialrig Alnan Rannoch, and it's all in Gaelic. And if you are into reading in Gaelic, I highly recommend checking that out because it gives you an insight into the story of Dougal Buchanan's life and also Perthshire. I said earlier that I would return to Schiehallion. So while we're in Kinloch Rannoch, it seems fitting to do that. Although Schiehallion, Schiehallion, has become known as the fairy hill or mountain of the Caledonians, it is also known in local dialect as Schiehallion, the mountain of constant storms. I don't know which one is true, I think both of them work, but this just highlights the Perthshire dialect. Perthshire has its own dialect, and there is work being done at present by the likes of the East Perthshire Gaelic Group and others to revive that. The dialect is well documented thanks to the work of 20th century linguists. There was a book by Martin O'Muruchu collecting some of the dialect, and also you can hear Perthshire Gaelic on the Tober and Dúchas website, which has recordings from the School of Scottish Studies. And a couple of years ago, some local lads discovered a native speaker of Perthshire Gaelic, who I think was 102 at the time, living in one of our local care homes. And she spoke Perthshire Gaelic and she remembered it being spoken. Gaelic is very much alive across Perthshire, in our schools, in our communities, amongst our Gaelic choirs, and of course in our landscape. I hope this whistle-stop tour has helped you understand a bit more about Gaelic in historic Perthshire, and I'm happy to attempt to answer any questions that you might have about what I've spoken about tonight. Thank you very much.
Vashin Scunnell, Aileen, more and tang, orage Inchinach agus Shine Alain, Mirvoch. So I think we do have some time for some questions, and a few were coming in, but I might abuse privileges and ask a first quick question. Do you have a favourite place name from the Perthshire area? That's
a really tricky question because I think that changes every week. The more I get out in the hills and discover more or read more. I am a very big fan of Bainaglaw, the mountain or hill of mist or vapour. And my reason for that is there's lots of stories connected to the Cailleach controlling the mist around it, and there's a song connected to it, and it's just a really nice name. But yeah, there's There are so many out there.
That's a good one. We have another place name related question. So are there any settlements still in Glen Tachanach, the Pleasant Glen? It looks from the photo that it would have had some crofting or other settlements.
There's not the part that I've explored. There aren't any settlements. There's actually the estate that's up there. They're doing some work, but I didn't come across any settlements still existing. It's a really long, empty glen, really.
Another question from an anonymous attendee. They're wondering how many lochs in Perthshire have Eich Uisce stories, so stories about kelpies or water horses. Is this known, or do you know of any other kind of notable stories?
That sounds like a PhD project. I don't know how many lochs are connected to Eich Uisce. There are lots, and actually Ross and I were discussing just before tonight's talk that there's a story around Callander about the Eich Uisce, very similar to a story collected by Lady Evelyn that happened up in Highland, Perthshire. So there's definitely two, but that is something I don't know the answer to, and is a very good question and something that maybe we need to look more into.
We have a question here from Gordon Ingle. Should we use Gaelic names more? Gaelic Uisce appears on all the maps in Callander, but I've never heard it called that, only the River Lenny.
Ooh. Yes, use Gaelic Uisce, I would say. The more we use these Gaelic names, the more they'll come back into use, yeah. What do you think?
Do you have a sense of why it kind of happens or happened over time that these names started to get kind of overtaken in some places?
I think it's probably because of the declining of Gaelic in the area. The actual people were using English more and started, using the English names or changing it themselves. So that's just my thought. In a lot of the places these names are still used, pronunciation isn't necessarily what it should be in Gaelic, but a lot of these place names are still used.
We have another question about Grania and Dermid. So is it the case that the two Turks, the hill at Glenshee and the wee hill at Balwhidder, are linked up to the Finn and Grania story? Surely there must be more Turks.
Yes, I think there are lots of Turks. Well, that I mentioned Mccool, as well as being the mountain of herding. It's also known as the Boar's Mountain, and actually it is a snouty looking mountain as well. So yeah, there are definitely other place names, and it goes right across. I think it's Ben Loyal up in Sutherland. There's a story there. So yes, they're all over. I don't know how these stories, people obviously travelled with these stories, and it could have been a case they were sitting around the campfire. Somebody's decided to tell the story, and they've just gone, it happened here in this place. In Glenshee, it's quite a natural theatrical setting with the backdrop of the mountain and like the grave, as you saw in the image I showed there. That was actually a performance that we did back in September in that site, and it is like a performance zone, so you can imagine just that setting and someone standing there telling a story. So I think they have travelled with the stories and put them wherever the story was being told.
I think just to add to that, and I might be wrong, but I think Crecan Turk at Balwhidder is related to the McLaren clan. So I think that was thought to be their battle cry. But there might again be a relation to the Dermid story there too. So we have a place name question, putting you on the spot here to try and decipher some place names. Archaeology in action here. So what is the meaning of, and forgive me for maybe butchering this, but what is the meaning of Artra Sagart or Artra Sagarst, maybe? Might not be. My Gaelic-speaking great-grandparents lived there.
Well, Sagart, should that be the minister?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure about the first word there.
Art, so A-R-T, R-A-S-G-A-R-T. So Gart could be like a field, isn't it, possibly?
Oh, Sagart. I think Sagart Minister.
Yeah.
Where it would be good to know where that is.
Well, maybe Peter, this is Peter Mingus, maybe you could drop me an email and maybe we can get to the bottom of that. We've got a couple of other questions coming through. Yeah, so this is from John Robertson. When starting hill walking and Munro bagging in his younger days in the 70s, he never really thought about the names on the maps relating to Gaelic. Have they always been used on OS maps? And do you know when they were first printed?
I don't know when they were first printed, but yes, they were always used on OS maps. And they tried to use the local names, and sometimes the names are preserved as they should be. Gaelic's obviously an oral language, so they were sometimes interpreted just as the way they were said, but a lot of them are actually the Gaelic words that we'd recognise now. But yeah, I'm not quite sure when that started happening. I think if you take a look back through the National Library of Scotland's map archive, which is amazing, you can get lost for hours looking at that, and you can see where the names started to be recorded and when they changed. I don't know, Ross, do you know when they started recording them?
I've got 1840s in my mind, but I don't know if that's exactly right. That could be well off. So we have a question from Mike Parsons, and maybe focusing Perthshire at large. What is the percentage of Gaelic speakers in the area today?
It's less than 1%, really, or just about 1%. I know this actually 2021 is the year of the census. Whether or not that happens, I don't know. So we'll get a picture of this year if they do the census this year. We'll find out what it looks like now. In Perth and Kinross area, so because we're now no longer Perthshire as one, everything's quite separate in the way it's recorded. It's recorded in the different local authority areas, but in Perth and Kinross, it's over 2,000 speakers, which is obviously a small proportion in comparison to what it was, because at one time there was about 14,500 to 15,000 people across the whole area that spoke Gaelic. Yeah, so now that's what it is now. I don't know if you know around about Callander, what the percentage is.
I think it's only thought to be maybe a kind of handful, maybe up to about 10 people in Callander itself, that are fluent speakers anyway, out of a population of about 3,000. So that kind of gives you an idea. These are kind of two related questions, both related to pronunciation. So two anonymous attendees have kind of asked a similar thing, one of them putting it slightly differently to the other. For example, does it cause you pain to hear hill walkers mangle so much Gaelic? And do you think, therefore, this is from the other attendee, should there be more effort put in to try and get correct pronunciations known?
So how do I answer this? Which one will I answer first? It does sometimes pain me to hear pronunciations, but sometimes I'm not the best at pronouncing some of the names on the maps if it's words I don't know, as a learner of Gaelic as well. But yeah, it's sometimes I'll hear somebody say something and I'll correct them just because I'm like, no, please say it like this. Walk Highlands does have pronunciation of most of the Munros and Corbetts on its website, the sound file, and that I think has helped when people are out and people that look at them. But yes, it would be good to get people more in tune with the sound of Gaelic. I'm not sure how we do that. We need a tour guide out there telling people how to pronounce these places, or if we just do some guides. But I think there's a lot of work being done to do that. And also Duolingo is a good way to start Gaelic as well.
We have a few people coming in to again suggest, similar to what you had, Aileen, for that place name, maybe Arsht Sagart, height of the priest or minister. Kind of sounds plausible. We'll maybe try and get to the bottom of that for Peter Mingus. We have a question from Gavin McGregor here. Are there any Perthshire artists and musicians composing or writing new songs and stories of the landscape?
Of the landscape in particular, I don't know. In Gaelic, I'm not entirely sure. There are people who are, making new versions of traditional songs. I've done that myself, but I don't know about actually writing new Gaelic songs about the landscape. It's something I definitely would like to do, and I think we should be encouraging musicians locally, whether they speak Gaelic or not, to actually look at including that in their music, because there's a lot of inspiration out there, as you saw in all the things that I discovered tonight.
That's great. And I think
also,
maybe
if anyone knows of anyone who is, then let us know.
Definitely. I think one last question to finish up from Colin Davenport, and this is quite kind of broad, but we'll try and relate it to Gaelic, I guess. What activities are you planning for outdoors for when we're allowed back out again?
So this is something that we've gone through several times. I think both of the council and Callander's landscape about how we actually run our activities when we can. So the Walking the Gaelic Landscape is a project that we've been doing, and prior to lockdown we had scheduled in some guided walks in the area exploring the Gaelic landscape, and when it's safe to do so we do plan to do that. And also our Gaelic playgroup, which is currently happening on Zoom, and it works. We've managed to continue it for nearly a year now, but we'd quite like to get our Gaelic playgroup outside doing activities when we can. And yeah, so that's the two things, and potentially more gigs. That one I had a picture of was the Callander Eco Museum up in Glenshee arranged that, and I know that they're planning to do more outdoor gigs and poetry trails and walks as well when we're allowed to, or when it's safe to do so.
That's fantastic. So some things to look forward to, definitely. And just related to that, before we finish up and thank Aileen, Aileen mentioned the difficulties in trying to make things go online and that transition from, the outdoors into the indoors. We had originally planned to do guided walks, and we did a few, but not as many as we would have liked, exploring place names round about Callander. So to try and combat that, we've just launched today what we're calling Gaelic place names points of interest round about Callander. So this is on a website called Interesting Walks, where you can pick 12 different viewpoints or points of interest from the Callander area and explore some place names, get a little bit of information about them, what they mean. Here's some attempts by myself at pronunciation. So we will link that to you in the kind of survey email that comes out after the talk tonight, along with some of the other things that Aileen was kindly mentioning, such as Callum McLean's video and things like that. So we'll get that all together. I'll just see if there's any last questions, or it might just be thanks coming through now. Oh yes, actually this is maybe pertinent. Maria would like to have a link to the Gaelic playgroup if possible. So I'll try and put you in touch.
Yeah, if you take a look at, there's a Facebook page and it's Crolligan Fiarsht. You should be able to find it by searching Perth Gaelic Playgroup, but I'll actually, I think you can see my contact details on the screen there. If you drop me an email at gaelic@pkc.gov.uk, I can send you through the joining details for that as well.
That's perfect. Well, thank you again very much, Aileen, for a fascinating talk, and thanks again for allowing us to enjoy some singing as well, which was a lovely surprise. So I know, people can't physically clap and have that heard, but I'm sure it'd be a raucous applause you'd be getting in ordinary circumstances. So thank you so much again for a fascinating evening, and to let everyone else know again that, we will be recording this. We have recorded this, and we'll make it available on our YouTube. So we'll send that link out to you if you want to share. But thanks again for joining us, and thanks again, Aileen.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And yes, there's more to explore, so start finding out more about Gaelic in Perthshire.